They said Red Hollow was built on cotton and God's favor. But under that plantation, there was a room no sunlight ever touched, a cellar where the screams never stopped. Naomi was chained there for 5 years, forced to bear what no one should. Beside her, Isaac, the blacksmith, marked the days on the walls with bits of bone, and waited. When the master's wife discovered the secret, she thought freeing them would save her soul. But, in Red Hollow, mercy only fed the fire, because when Naomi came back, she didn't come for freedom. She came for balance. The master kept his slaves chained in the breeding cellar, until the night they decided to return the favor. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The walls sweated with the sound of God turning away. Naomi sat in darkness so complete it had weight. The air pressed against her face like a wet cloth, thick with the smell of earth and rot, and something worse. The stink of bodies kept too close, too long, without mercy. Somewhere to her left, maybe 10 feet away, maybe less. Sarah screamed again. The sound scraped through the blackness like a blade on stone. The baby was coming, had been coming for hours. Naomi's wrists ached, where the iron cuffs held her to the post. She'd stopped pulling against them months ago. The metal had worn grooves into her skin, pale lines that never quite healed before they split open again. She could feel the dampness on her wrists now. Sweat or blood. It didn't matter. Both came easy in the cellar. "Push now," someone whispered. Mary's voice. Old Mary, who'd been down here longest, who remembered things from before the chains. "Push, girl. Almost there." Sarah's scream turned into something animal, something that wasn't supposed to come from a human throat. Naomi closed her eyes, though it made no difference. Dark was dark, whether your eyes were open or shut. She tried to think of other things, clean things, the smell of rain on tobacco leaves, the creek behind the main house where she used to wash clothes, back when she still saw daylight. Back before Master Rusk decided she was better suited for different work. The breeding cellar sat beneath the smokehouse, carved into red Georgia clay by hands that were probably dead now. 8 posts stood in a rough circle, each one anchored deep enough that pulling wouldn't budge it. 8 chains, 8 people. The ceiling was so low that Isaac, the tallest among them, had to stoop when they dragged him down here. Wooden beams crossed overhead, supporting the floor above. Sometimes Naomi could hear footsteps up there. The kitchen slaves moving around, pretending they didn't know what happened below their feet. No windows, no light, except when Master Rusk brought his lantern. The walls wept constantly, moisture running down brick and clay in thin streams that pooled in the corners. Naomi had learned the sound of that dripping water, the way she'd once learned hymns. 3 drops from the north wall, 5 from the east. A steady rhythm that marked time when nothing else did. "There," Mary said. "There she is." A thin, wet cry cut through the darkness. New. Fragile. Naomi's chest tightened. Another one born in chains. Another soul that would never know what freedom tasted like. Sarah was sobbing now, soft and broken. The baby kept crying, that desperate sound of something wanting warmth, wanting milk, wanting a mother's arms. "Girl or boy?" someone asked. "Thomas, maybe." His voice had gotten rough down here, scraped raw from the damp. "Girl," Mary said. "Tiny little thing." Naomi heard movement, chains rattling as Mary shifted, probably cutting the cord with the piece of broken pottery they kept for that purpose. The baby's cries got louder, then muffled as Mary wrapped her in something. Rags, probably. Scraps of cloth that were already falling apart. "She won't let you keep her," Naomi said quietly. The words came out flat. She'd seen it happen before. Sarah didn't answer, just kept crying. Naomi shifted against the post, trying to find a position that didn't make her back scream. The bricks behind her were rough, uneven. Over the months, she'd memorized every bump and gap. And in one particular spot, about shoulder height, she'd found something useful, a sharp edge where two bricks met badly. She reached back now, fingers searching in the dark until she found it. The bone fragment was small, no longer than her thumb, broken off from something Mary had saved from a meal months ago. Naomi had been working at it, scraping it against the brick edge when she could, sharpening one end into something almost useful. Not a weapon, nothing that could cut flesh or break chains, but it could scratch brick. She pressed the pointed end against the wall and dragged it slowly downward. The sound was barely a whisper, lost beneath Sarah's weeping and the baby's cries. She carved a single letter, then another. Words were dangerous. Master Rusk had made that clear. Reading was forbidden. Writing was forbidden. But down here, in darkness where he couldn't see, Naomi scratched messages into the wall. Short ones, simple ones. Still here. Don't forget. Last be first. You writing again? Isaac's voice came from across the circle, low and careful. He was chained to the post opposite hers, close enough that they could talk if they kept their voices down. Maybe, Naomi said. What's it say? She didn't answer right away. The bone scraped against brick, forming the curve of another letter. Just words. Scripture, mostly. Don't know Scripture, Isaac said. Never learned it. The last shall be first, Naomi whispered, and the first shall be last. Isaac was quiet for a moment. She could hear his chains shifting as he moved. You believe that? Have to believe something. I believe we're gonna die down here, Isaac said. His voice was hard, angry. He'd been a blacksmith once, before Rusk chained him. His arms were thick with muscle and marked with old burn scars from forge work. Naomi had never seen his face clearly, only caught glimpses when the lantern light fell right. But she knew the sound of rage when she heard it. Maybe, Naomi said, but maybe not. The baby had stopped crying. Sarah's sobs were fading into exhausted silence. Somewhere water dripped. 3 drops, 5 drops. The same rhythm it always followed. Naomi's fingers kept moving, scratching words into brick that no one could read. Messages to herself. To God, if he was still listening. To whoever might come after, if anyone ever did. She'd carved dozens of them now. Hundreds, maybe. They covered the wall behind her post, invisible in the darkness. A testament written in scratches and silence. The last shall be first. The last shall be first. The last shall... Footsteps. Naomi's hand froze. The bone fragment slipped from her fingers and clattered against the floor. Heavy boots crossed the floor above. Slow, deliberate, moving toward the smokehouse. Everyone in the cellar went still. Even the baby was quiet now, as if she knew what those footsteps meant. Metal scraped against metal. The trap door. A line of light appeared overhead, thin as a knife blade. It grew wider as the door creaked open, spilling yellow lamplight down the wooden ladder. Master Alden Rusk descended, holding his lantern in one hand. In the other, he carried a chain. The lantern light swung across the cellar like a dying star. Naomi's eyes burned as the brightness passed over her face. Months of darkness made even weak flame unbearable. She squinted, turning her head, but not before she saw Rusk's shadow stretch across the wet brick walls, tall and distorted. He moved slowly between the posts, boots squelching in the mud that never dried. The lantern cast everything in sharp yellow and black. No gradations, no mercy, just light and shadow, just master and slave. "Look at you," Rusk said, stopping in front of Naomi's post. "Still strong." His voice was smooth, educated, the kind of voice that spoke at church on Sundays and quoted scripture about obedience. He wore a dark coat despite the heat, always formal, always proper. His face was lean and clean-shaven, with pale eyes that never blinked enough. Naomi kept her gaze down. Looking at him directly was dangerous. Silence was safer. Rusk crouched, bringing the lantern close to her shackles. The metal gleamed, still solid despite her months of wearing them. He reached out and tested the cuff on her right wrist, tugging it to check the fit. "Prime stock," he said, almost to himself. "Strong bones, good teeth. You'll breed well for years yet." Naomi's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. The words slid over her like oil, thick and foul, but nothing new. She'd heard worse, would probably hear worse again. Rusk stood, his knees cracking. He was maybe 40, still strong despite the gray creeping into his hair. He moved the lantern slowly across the other captives, counting them like livestock. His gaze stopped on one of the men, Joshua. Young, maybe 20, with a scar running down his left cheek from when the overseer had struck him for speaking out of turn. "You," Rusk said. "Come here." Joshua didn't move. His chains rattled slightly as his breathing quickened. "I said, come here." "Can't," Joshua said, voice cracking. "I'm chained." Rusk's expression didn't change. He set the lantern down carefully, then pulled a key from his coat pocket. He unlocked Joshua's shackles with practiced efficiency, the metal clicking open with a sound that made Naomi's stomach turn. For half a second, Joshua was free. His wrists bore the same pale grooves everyone's did, scars carved by iron. Then Rusk grabbed the chain he'd brought down with him and wrapped it around Joshua's neck like a leash. "Walk," Rusk commanded. He dragged Joshua toward the center of the cellar, where the ceiling was highest. The young man stumbled, still weak from being chained in one position for days. Rusk yanked the chain hard, jerking him upright. "I've been patient with you," Rusk said, his voice still calm, still reasonable, "given you time to understand your purpose here. But you continue to refuse." "I can't," Joshua started. The first blow came fast. Rusk's fist caught Joshua across the face, snapping his head sideways. Blood appeared at his lip, black in the lamplight. "You can't?" Rusk asked. "Or you won't." He struck again. Then again. Joshua tried to raise his arms to protect himself, but the chain around his neck made movement impossible. He could only take it. Naomi looked away. She couldn't help him, couldn't stop it. None of them could. But she heard it. Every impact, every gasp, every time Joshua's body hit the mud. "You will do as you're told," Rusk said between blows. His breathing stayed steady, controlled. This wasn't rage. This was instruction. "You will breed when I say. You will produce strong children. That is your purpose. That is why you exist." Joshua made a sound, half sob, half moan. Across the circle, Naomi heard Isaac's chains rattle violently. She glanced toward him and saw his silhouette straining against his post, muscles corded with effort. His hands were fists, arms shaking. "Stop watching," Naomi whispered, barely audible. "It makes it worse." Isaac didn't respond. She could feel his rage like heat, radiating through the darkness. Rusk stopped hitting Joshua. The young man collapsed to his knees, breathing in ragged gasps. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading slowly through the mud. "Take him back to his post," Rusk said, speaking to no one in particular. Then his gaze found Isaac. "You, blacksmith." Isaac's chains went still. Rusk walked over, dragging Joshua behind him like a sack. He stopped in front of Isaac's post and tilted his head, studying him. "I know what you're thinking," Rusk said quietly. "I can see it in the way you hold yourself. You think you're stronger than me. You think if these chains came off, you could break me in half." Isaac said nothing. "Maybe you could," Rusk continued, "but you'll never get the chance. Because if you give me trouble, if you refuse like this fool did, I'll sell you south. Rice plantations in the Carolina swamps. Men don't last 2 years there. The water kills them. The fever kills them. The work kills them." He leaned closer. "So you'll breed when I tell you, or you'll die somewhere worse. Do you understand?" Isaac's voice came out low and hard. "Yes, master." Rusk smiled, not with pleasure, with satisfaction, like a man who'd solved a simple problem. He dragged Joshua back to his post and locked the shackles again. The young man slumped against the iron, barely conscious. Blood ran down his chin and dripped onto his chest. Rusk picked up his lantern and moved toward the ladder. "Remember," he said, looking back over his shoulder, "you exist because I allow it. You breathe because I permit it. Your children will be mine. Your bodies are mine. Everything you are belongs to me." He climbed the ladder with the same deliberate slowness he'd descended. The trapdoor creaked shut above him. Darkness swallowed the cellar again. For a long time, no one spoke. Joshua's breathing was wet and labored. Somewhere, Sarah held her baby and wept silently. Then Isaac's voice cut through the dark, pitched low so only Naomi could hear. "I used to forge iron for his family." Naomi turned her head toward him, though she couldn't see him. "Made chains," Isaac continued. "Made locks. Made everything that holds us here. I know metal better than he knows his own wife." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I know the layout beneath this smokehouse. There's a furnace room behind that far wall. They use it to cure the meat. And in that room, there's a key." His chains rattled as he shifted. "The master key. Opens every lock in this building." Naomi's heart started beating faster. "How would we reach it?" "We'd need a distraction. Someone to pull Clay, the overseer, away during inspection. Just for a few minutes." "I could do that," Naomi said. "You'd have to make him believe it. Make him follow you somewhere. Keep his attention." "I can do it." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "He'll hurt you. He hurts me anyway." Above ground, footsteps crossed the smokehouse floor. Different footsteps, lighter. A woman's steps. Evelyn Rusk stood near the trap door, her hand pressed against the wall. She'd followed her husband here, curious about where he disappeared to most nights. Now she listened to voices rising through the floorboards. Her husband's voice and another man's. A trader, discussing prices. "Best breeding stock in Georgia," Alden was saying. "Strong lines. Good genetics. I've been selective." "How many you got down there?" the trader asked. 8 currently, but they're producing regularly. 2 births this month alone." Evelyn's face went pale. Her fingers curled against the wood. She'd known something was wrong. Had known for months, maybe years. But knowing and understanding were different things. She'd told herself it was none of her business. That plantation matters were her husband's domain. That a proper wife didn't question. But breeding stock, beneath her feet, while she slept in clean sheets and prayed in church. Her jaw tightened. Something in her expression hardened. A decision forming behind her eyes. She turned and walked away, her footsteps quick and purposeful. Down in the cellar, Naomi heard those retreating steps and wondered whose they were. Morning came eventually, though they only knew it by Rusk's schedule. He descended the ladder again at what must have been dawn, lantern in hand to check on Joshua. He moved quickly this time, distracted. As he turned to leave, his boot caught on something, a piece of loose brick, maybe, or just his own carelessness. The lantern fell from his hand. It hit the mud with a wet thud. The flame flickered, dancing sideways, nearly catching on the old straw scattered near the base of the ladder. But it didn't catch. The dampness was too much. The flame guttered and died, leaving only smoke and the smell of burnt oil. Rusk cursed, picked up the useless lantern, and climbed back up without another word. Darkness again, complete and total. Naomi stared at where the lantern had fallen, where the flame had almost spread. She whispered into the darkness, so quiet that maybe only she heard it. If the light can fall once, it can fall again. The guilt came in waves. Evelyn Rusk lay in her bed that night, listening to her husband's drunken snoring from the room down the hall. He'd spent the evening drinking brandy and boasting to himself about profits and breeding success. She'd watched him from the doorway, disgust twisting in her stomach like spoiled meat. She couldn't stop thinking about what she'd heard: the trader's visit, her husband's casual pride, breeding stock. 8 human beings chained beneath the smokehouse like animals in a barn. For years, she'd told herself that plantation business wasn't her concern, that a wife's duty was silence and submission. Her mother had taught her that survival meant looking away from men's sins. Her father had taught her that questions only brought suffering, but she'd looked away too long. Now, in the darkness of her room, she understood that silence wasn't innocence. It was participation. Every meal she'd eaten, every dress she'd worn, every prayer she'd whispered in church, all of it built on the backs of people screaming beneath her feet. The realization made her want to vomit. She rose from bed, still dressed in her nightgown, and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. The house was dark and quiet. Alden's snoring echoed through the hallway, regular and deep. He wouldn't wake for hours. The brandy always knocked him senseless. Evelyn moved through the kitchen, past the cold stove, out the back door. The night air was thick with humidity and the smell of curing tobacco. Crickets sang in the darkness. The moon hung low and fat over the fields. The smokehouse stood separate from the main buildings, a squat stone structure with a sloped roof. Smoke drifted from its chimney even now, carrying the scent of hickory and salt. Evelyn's hands shook as she approached the door. She'd never been inside, had never had reason to. The smokehouse was men's territory, Alden's domain, where he cured meat and kept his private business. She pushed the door open. The interior smelled of smoke and blood, and something else, something rotten underneath. The trapdoor was in the corner, nearly hidden beneath a stack of empty barrels. She moved the barrels aside, her breathing quick and shallow. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She lifted the trapdoor. The hinges screamed. The smell that rose from below made her gag. Human waste, sweat, infection, blood. The concentrated stench of suffering packed into an airless space. Evelyn covered her mouth and nose, forcing herself not to turn away. She grabbed a lantern from the wall and descended the ladder. The light revealed everything. 8 people, chained to posts, sitting in mud and filth. Their clothes were rags. Their bodies were covered in sores and scars. Some were asleep. Others stared at her with hollow eyes. A young woman, couldn't be more than 23, looked up from the nearest post. Her face was gaunt but beautiful, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that held no hope. "You ain't supposed to see this, miss," the woman whispered. Evelyn's knees went weak. She stumbled backward against the ladder, the lantern swinging in her grip. The light danced across the walls, revealing scratched messages in the brick. Names, prayers, curses. "Oh, God," Evelyn breathed. "Oh, God, oh, God." She sank to her knees in the mud, the expensive fabric of her nightgown soaking through immediately. Tears streamed down her face. Her whole body shook. All this time, all these years, while she'd slept in clean sheets and prayed for grace. "I didn't know," she said, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. "I should have known, but I didn't. I couldn't." "Most don't want to," the young woman said. Her voice was steady, calm, like she was explaining something simple to a child. Easier not to look. Evelyn lifted her head, meeting the woman's eyes. "What's your name?" "Naomi. Naomi." Evelyn wiped her face with shaking hands. "I'm going to help you. I'll come back. I'll get you out. I promise." A man across the cellar laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "White woman's promises ain't worth the air they waste." But Naomi's expression didn't change. She studied Evelyn's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, miss. We'll see." Evelyn climbed back up the ladder, replaced the trapdoor, and returned to the house. She didn't sleep. She sat at her vanity and stared at her reflection until dawn, planning. The next evening, Evelyn prepared carefully. She bathed and dressed in her finest gown, deep green silk that Alden favored. She arranged her hair and painted her lips with berry stain. She looked like the perfect plantation wife, beautiful and obedient. She found Alden in his study, reviewing ledgers, and brought him wine. French wine, expensive, saved for special occasions. "What's this?" he asked, suspicious but pleased. "I thought we might have an evening together," she said, keeping her voice soft and sweet. "It's been so long since we've talked. Really talked." He studied her face, looking for deception, then shrugged. "I suppose business can wait." She poured him glass after glass, encouraging him to drink while she barely touched her own. She asked about the plantation, about profits, about his plans. She laughed at his jokes and touched his hand. The phonograph played in the parlor. Mozart, his favorite. The music drifted through the house like a promise of civilization and culture, like they were good people, living good lives. After the fourth glass, Alden's words began to slur. After the sixth, his eyes grew heavy. Evelyn suggested he rest, and he didn't argue. She helped him to the bedroom and watched him collapse onto the bed, still half-dressed. His snoring started within minutes. Evelyn waited until she was certain he was unconscious, then moved quickly. She took the keyring from his coat pocket, the heavy iron circle that held every lock on the plantation. Her hands didn't shake anymore. The guilt had burned away, leaving only cold purpose. She went to the smokehouse, moved the barrels, opened the trap door. This time she descended with the keys. The captives were awake, watching her with wary eyes. "I'm getting you out," she said. "Now. Tonight." She started with Naomi's shackles, fitting different keys until one clicked. The iron fell away. Naomi stood slowly, unsteady after so long sitting, and rubbed her wrists where the metal had carved deep grooves. Then Isaac. Then the others. 5 men, 3 women. All of them too thin, too broken, but standing. As the last lock opened, footsteps sounded outside the smokehouse. Everyone froze. The door opened. Clay, the overseer, stepped inside. He was a thick man in his 30s, loyal to Alden and cruel by nature. "Mrs. Rusk?" he called. "That you in here?" Evelyn's mind raced. She stepped toward the ladder quickly, positioning herself between Clay and the trap door. "Yes," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "I heard rats, scratching sounds. I was checking to make sure they hadn't gotten into the meat." Clay frowned, suspicious. "Middle of the night?" "I couldn't sleep. The noise bothered me." He studied her face, then glanced past her toward the trap door. The barrels were moved. Anyone could see something was wrong. "Find anything?" he asked. "Just old wood settling. False alarm." She moved toward the door, trying to draw him away. "I'm going back to bed now. My husband is waiting." Clay hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Mrs." He left first. Evelyn waited until his footsteps faded, then descended the ladder again. "He's gone," she whispered. "But we need to move." "Now." Isaac spoke for the first time. His voice was deep and rough from disuse. "I know a path. Through the swamp. Old Forge Road I used to walk. Goes north. Can you find it in the dark?" "Yes." They climbed out one by one, moving like ghosts through the smokehouse. Evelyn led them to the edge of the property, where the cultivated fields gave way to wild growth and standing water. "Go," she said. "Don't stop. Don't look back." Isaac led them into the darkness, his knowledge of the land guiding them through channels and reed beds. The others followed silently, their movements quick despite weakness. They'd been waiting so long for this moment that exhaustion didn't matter anymore. Evelyn watched them disappear into the mist, then turned back toward the house. She had to return. Had to be there when Alden woke. Had to play the innocent wife who knew nothing. Otherwise, he'd send men after them immediately. Dawn broke gray and cold over the swamp. The freed captives huddled in a patch of tall reeds, hidden from sight, watching light spread across the water. Naomi looked back the way they'd come, half expecting to see torches, to hear dogs, to find it all had been a dream. But there was only mist, only silence. Behind them, through the trees, Evelyn Rusk stood at the edge of her property. She'd followed at a distance, making sure they'd gotten away safely. Now she met Naomi's eyes across the water. Her voice carried through the quiet morning, shaking but clear. "You don't owe me thanks," she said. "You owe him pain." Then she turned and walked back toward the mansion, her green silk gown trailing through the mud. The freed captives watched her go until she disappeared completely into the mist. The cypress trees rose from black water like the fingers of drowned giants, reaching toward a pale sky. Naomi waded through the swamp, her bare feet sinking into mud that sucked at each step. Cold water reached her waist. Every movement sent ripples through the surface, disturbing insects that rose in angry clouds. Her legs were torn from thorns and sharp grass. Blood mixed with swamp water, leaving faint trails behind her. She didn't care. Each step carried her farther from the cellar, farther from chains, farther from the darkness that had swallowed 5 years of her life. Isaac moved ahead, using a long stick to test the depth before each step. His blacksmith's shoulders were broad, even after months of starvation. Burn scars covered his forearms like maps of old pain. He'd stripped off his shirt and wrapped it around his bleeding feet. "Keep moving," he said quietly. "Sun's coming up. We need cover before it gets light." Behind them, the others struggled through the water. Mary clutched at cypress roots to pull herself forward. Her seamstress hands, once precise and steady, shook with exhaustion. Jonas, thin as a willow branch, helped old Ruth navigate the deeper channels. The 2 young men, Samuel and Thomas, brought up the rear, constantly looking back the way they'd come. The air buzzed with mosquitoes. They landed on exposed skin, drinking freely from people too tired to swat them away. Naomi's face and arms swelled with bites that itched like fire. "How much farther?" Mary gasped. "Not far," Isaac said. "There's old hunting grounds up ahead. White men used to come out here for deer and wild turkey. Haven't seen nobody using them in years." The water grew shallower as they moved onto higher ground. Solid earth appeared beneath their feet. Actual dirt instead of sucking mud. Naomi wanted to kiss it. Instead, she kept walking, following Isaac through dense undergrowth that caught at her ragged dress. The cabin appeared through morning mist like something from a dream. It was small and weathered, with a sagging roof and walls covered in vines. But it had 4 walls and a door and windows that could be covered. It was shelter. Isaac tested the door. The wood was swollen and stuck, but he put his shoulder against it and shoved hard. The door broke open with a crack that echoed through the swamp. Everyone froze, listening. Nothing. Just birdsong and the distant croaking of frogs. They filed inside. The cabin was bare except for a broken chair and an old fireplace blackened with soot. The floor was dirt, and holes in the roof let in fingers of gray light. But after the cellar, it felt like a palace. Naomi stood in the center of the room and looked up through one of the holes at the sky. Real sky. Gray clouds moving slowly overhead. She'd forgotten how beautiful it was. Her knees gave out. She sank to the ground and started crying. Great shaking sobs that tore through her chest. All the fear and pain and rage she'd held inside for 5 years came pouring out at once. Mary knelt beside her, wrapping thin arms around Naomi's shoulders. "It's all right," she whispered. "We're out. We're free." But were they? Naomi couldn't tell if what she felt was freedom or just a different kind of terror. Isaac and Jonas worked to start a fire, while old Ruth examined everyone's wounds. She tore strips from her own dress to wrap around bleeding feet and infected sores. Her gnarled hands moved with practiced skill, sorting injuries by severity. "We need food," she said. "Clean water, medicine. These cuts will fester without proper care." "I'll hunt," Isaac said. "There's frogs in the swamp, maybe fish in the deeper pools." "I'll help," Jonas offered. The two men left the cabin, moving quietly through the undergrowth. Samuel and Thomas took turns keeping watch at the windows. Mary helped old Ruth tend wounds. Naomi sat by the small fire they'd built, watching flames dance and flicker. She held her hands toward the warmth, feeling heat on her palms for the first time in years that didn't come from fever or infection. "What do we do now?" Mary asked softly. "We rest," old Ruth said. "Then we move north. Find the underground roads they whisper about. Find people who help runaways reach free soil." "Is there really such a thing?" Thomas asked. He was 19, with a boy's face and an old man's eyes. "Free soil? Has to be," old Ruth said firmly. "Lord wouldn't have brought us this far just to let us die in a swamp." Naomi wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe in divine providence and justice, and a God who saw suffering and intervened. But the Cellar had taught her that sometimes God looked away. Isaac and Jonas returned an hour later, with 6 frogs and a handful of muddy roots. They cooked everything over the fire, burning their fingers in their haste to eat. The food was barely enough to quiet the worst of their hunger, but it was something. For 3 days they lived in the cabin. They ate whatever they could catch or dig up. Frogs, roots, berries that old Ruth identified as safe. They took turns keeping watch. They spoke in whispers about the future. Isaac believed freedom lay north. He'd heard stories from other slaves about places where black people could own land and live without fear. He talked about it constantly, spinning dreams of fields they'd work for themselves, houses they'd build with their own hands. Naomi listened, but said little. She didn't know what she wanted, except peace. She wanted to sleep without fear. She wanted to wake up without chains. That was enough. On the morning of the 4th day, Jonas went to scout the main road for any sign of pursuit. He returned an hour later, his face pale and tight. "Rusk's horse," he said. "Saw it outside the general store. Tied up while he talked to the sheriff." Everyone went still. "Did he see you?" Isaac asked. "No, I stayed in the trees, but I heard them talking." Jonas swallowed hard. "Mrs. Rusk is dead." Naomi's hands began to tremble. "Dead?" "Found her hanged in her parlor. They're saying she did it herself. Guilt over freeing us." Jonas looked at Naomi. "Rusk's telling everyone his wife went mad, that she betrayed him and then couldn't live with what she'd done." The room was silent, except for the crackling fire. Mary spoke first. "She freed us. She gave us this chance. And it killed her," Naomi whispered. Old Ruth closed her eyes and began to pray quietly, her lips moving without sound. Isaac stood and walked to the window, staring out at the swamp. His jaw was clenched so tight, the muscles jumped. "He'll rebuild," he said. "Men like Rusk don't stop. They just start over." "What do you mean?" Samuel asked. "The cellar. The breeding." Isaac turned to face them, and his eyes were hard as iron. "You think losing 8 slaves will change him? He'll find more. Chain more. Build another cellar somewhere else on the property where nobody can find it." Naomi felt something cold settle in her stomach. She knew Isaac was right. Rusk's cruelty wasn't about them specifically. It was about control, about power, about treating human beings like livestock. And if they ran north and found freedom, what about the next people he chained? What about the children he'd breed and sell? What about all the suffering that would continue because they chose survival over justice? "We can't go back," Mary said. "We'll die if we go back." "We'll die anyway," Isaac said quietly. "Maybe not today, maybe not next week. But men like Rusk don't forget. They hunt, they track, they make examples." He looked at each of them in turn. "The only way we're truly free is if he can't come after us. Ever." Night fell slowly over the swamp. The fire burned low. Nobody spoke much. They all knew what Isaac was suggesting without him having to say it directly. Naomi stood at the window, watching the distant glow on the horizon where Red Hollow's lights burned against the darkness. She thought about Evelyn Rusk hanging in her parlor. She thought about the cellar still standing beneath the smokehouse. She thought about all the people who would suffer if they did nothing. She turned to face the others. "If he built one cellar," she said quietly, "he'll build another." The group looked at each other in the firelight. Then, one by one, they turned toward the glow of Red Hollow on the horizon. They moved through the twilight like ghosts. The sun was sinking behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise. Naomi's bare feet made no sound on the dirt path leading toward Red Hollow. Behind her, Isaac and the others spread out in a loose line, keeping to the shadows between the cotton rows. The plantation looked different. Wrong. The fields that had once been thick with workers now stood mostly empty. A few scattered figures moved in the distance, but nothing like the dozens who used to labor from dawn until dark. The overseer's cabin sat dark and abandoned. Several windows in the main house were boarded shut. "Where is everyone?" Mary whispered. "Gone," old Ruth said. "After what happened with the missus, folks probably ran. And Rusk probably can't afford to keep as many anymore." Thomas pointed toward the barn. "Look!" Vultures circled overhead, their dark shapes cutting lazy circles against the darkening sky. 3 of them perched on the barn roof, hunched and waiting. The sight made Naomi's skin crawl. They crouched behind a wagon near the edge of the property and watched. The yard was quiet, except for the evening chorus of crickets and tree frogs. No dogs barked. No voices called out. Red Hollow felt like a place holding its breath. Then a door opened. Master Alden Rusk stepped onto the back porch of the main house. He carried a lantern in one hand, and even from a distance Naomi could see how much he'd changed. He'd always been tall and rigid, but now he looked almost skeletal. His clothes hung loose on his frame. His movements were jerky and uncertain. He walked down the steps and started across the yard, holding the lantern high. His lips moved, though no sound carried. He was talking to himself. "He's gone mad," Jonas breathed. They watched Rusk pace the grounds like a man searching for something he'd lost. He circled the barn, then moved toward the well, then back toward the house. His shadow stretched long and distorted in the lantern light. When he finally went back inside, Isaac motioned for the group to move. They crept closer to the buildings, using the deepening shadows for cover. The smokehouse stood apart from the other structures, just as Naomi remembered, but something was different. Fresh boards had been nailed across the door. New wood, pale against the weathered walls. Isaac ran his hands over the boards, feeling along the edges. He sealed it. Why would he seal an empty cellar? Samuel asked. But Naomi already knew. Her stomach turned to ice. Isaac wedged his fingers beneath one of the boards and pulled. The nails groaned. He pulled harder, muscles straining, until the board came free with a sharp crack that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet evening. They all froze, listening. Nothing. The house remained dark and silent. Isaac handed the board to Jonas and started on the next one. It came free more easily. Then the next. Within minutes, they'd cleared enough space to open the door. The smell hit them first. That familiar rot and human waste and fear. But there was something else now. Something sweeter and more terrible. The smell of children. Soft crying drifted up from below. High voices. Frightened whispers. Naomi felt her legs go weak. "No," she whispered. "Please, God, no." Isaac found the trap door and lifted it slowly. Lantern light from the main house provided just enough illumination to see the wooden stairs descending into darkness. The crying grew louder. "Stay here," Naomi said. "I'll go." "Not alone," Isaac said firmly. They descended together, feeling their way down the familiar steps. The cellar was smaller than the one Naomi remembered, but the layout was the same. wooden posts, iron rings, chains bolted to stone. But instead of grown men and women, small shapes huddled in the darkness. Children. Naomi's eyes adjusted slowly. There were 6 of them, ranging from maybe 3 years old to 8 or 9. They were chained in pairs, their small wrists raw from the iron cuffs. All of them were light-skinned, some with features that could pass for white, others clearly mixed. A little girl with tangled brown hair stared at them with wide eyes. She couldn't have been more than 5. "Are you here to hurt us?" she asked in a tiny voice. "No, baby," Naomi said, her throat closing. "No, we're here to help." She knelt beside the nearest child, a boy of about 4 with light brown skin and green eyes that seemed familiar in a way that made her chest ache. He looked up at her, and his face crumpled. "Mama," he whispered. The word hit Naomi like a fist. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The cellar spun around her. The boy reached for her with small hands still chained to the post. "Mama, I've been good. I promise, I've been good. Please take me home." Naomi's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the dirt floor, staring at the child who could. Behind her, Isaac moved through the cellar, examining the other children. His breathing had gone harsh and ragged. "They're his," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "These are Rusk's own children, the ones he bred in the first cellar." Old Ruth had descended the stairs. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Sweet Jesus, sweet, merciful Jesus. He's been selling them," Isaac continued, his hands clenched into fists. "Look at their skin. Look at their features. He's passing them off as mulatto stock, selling his own blood like livestock." The boy with green eyes was still reaching for Naomi. "Mama, please." She gathered him into her arms, chains and all, and held him against her chest. He was so small, so fragile. His heart beat against her like a trapped bird. "How long you been down here, baby?" she asked softly. "Don't know," he whispered. "Long time. The man comes and looks at us, says we're strong, says people will pay good money." Naomi looked at the other children. They stared back with hollow eyes that had seen too much, understood too much. They'd been born into this, born in chains, raised in darkness, bred for profit by their own father. The full scope of Rusk's evil crashed over her like a wave. It wasn't enough that he'd enslaved them. Wasn't enough that he'd bred them like animals. He'd created children for the sole purpose of selling them. His own flesh and blood, reduced to inventory. Mary had come down into the cellar. She moved from child to child, checking their chains, murmuring soft words. "We'll get you out," she promised. "We'll take you somewhere safe." But where? Naomi thought. Where could they go that Rusk wouldn't follow? Where could they run that his evil wouldn't reach? The boy in her arms had stopped crying. He'd gone limp and quiet, as if he'd learned that hope was dangerous, that believing in rescue only led to more pain. Naomi stroked his hair and felt something break inside her chest, not her heart. That had broken long ago. Something deeper, something that couldn't be repaired. Isaac knelt beside her. His scarred hands were shaking. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "He made the devil's house," he said. "So we'll burn the devil in it." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The first drops of rain began to fall above ground, pattering against the smokehouse roof. Naomi looked up at the cellar door, still creaking slightly on its hinges, and knew that Isaac was right. There was only one way to end this, only one way to make sure Rusk never hurt another soul. The storm was coming. The barn loft smelled of old hay and mouse droppings. Rain drummed steadily on the roof above, masking their whispers as they huddled in the darkness. Through gaps in the weathered boards, dawn was just beginning to gray the eastern horizon. Naomi sat with her back against a support beam, arms wrapped around her knees. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that little boy's face. heard his voice calling her mama. Isaac paced the small space like a caged animal. Mary and Jonas sat together near the ladder. Samuel and Thomas kept watch at the loft door. Old Ruth had her eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. "We do this today," Isaac said. His voice was rough with exhaustion and fury. "Before he has time to rebuild, before he brings in new overseers." "The children first," Naomi said. "We get them out before anything else." "Agreed." Isaac stopped pacing and crouched beside her. "Ruth takes them to the swamp at first light, hides them in that hunting cabin until we finish here." Mary spoke up. "And then what? What happens after?" Isaac's jaw tightened. "Then we make him answer for what he's done." "Kill him," Naomi said quietly. "I mean, make him suffer." Isaac's eyes were hard as flint. "Death's too quick, too merciful. He kept us in chains for years, fed us like dogs, bred us like livestock. He doesn't get to close his eyes and have it end." The words hung in the damp air. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. "We capture him alive," Isaac continued. "Drag him to his own cellar. Chain him to those same posts. Let him feel every bit of what he did to us." Jonas nodded slowly. "Eye for an eye." "The children," Naomi said again. "Promise me we save them first." Isaac met her gaze. "I promise." They spent the next hour planning every detail. The work was divided with careful precision, each person knowing exactly what they had to do. Jonas would poison the hunting dogs. Rusk kept 3 of them chained near the main house, vicious animals trained to track runaways. Jonas had found mushrooms in the swamp, the kind old Ruth said would put a dog to sleep permanently if mixed with meat. Mary's task was perhaps the most dangerous. She would approach Clay, the overseer, alone, pretend to surrender. Tell him she'd escaped the swamp, but couldn't survive out there. Lead him away from the house, toward the far fields where Isaac and Samuel would be waiting. Old Ruth would gather supplies from the main house, lamp oil, rags, anything that might burn. She moved quietly for her age, and her years as a house servant meant she knew the layout better than anyone. Naomi's job made her stomach turn, but she insisted on it. She would enter Rusk's bedroom, find his weapons, make sure he couldn't defend himself when the time came. "What if he wakes?" Mary asked. "Then I'll handle it," Naomi said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. As the sky lightened, they moved into position. Old Ruth took the children from the cellar, leading them into the cypress swamp with promises of food and safety. The little boy with green eyes looked back at Naomi as he left. She forced herself to smile at him, though it felt like her face might crack. Jonas crept to the dog kennels with chunks of salted pork stuffed with poison mushrooms. The animals ate eagerly, tails wagging. Within minutes, they were asleep. Within an hour, they wouldn't wake. Mary walked across the yard as the sun broke over the trees. She'd torn her dress and smeared mud on her face to look desperate and defeated. When Clay emerged from his cabin, scratching his belly and yawning, she called out to him in a broken voice. "Please, sir. Please. I can't run no more. I'm sorry. Just don't hurt me." Clay's face split into a cruel grin. He grabbed a length of rope from his porch and started toward her. "Well, well. Master's gonna be pleased. Come on, then. Let's get you back where you belong." Mary led him toward the tobacco fields, stumbling and weeping. Isaac and Samuel waited in the tall plants, their hands wrapped around chunks of firewood. Naomi slipped through the kitchen door, while Ruth kept watch. The house was silent, except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. She moved up the servants' stairs, each step careful and quiet. Rusk's bedroom door stood ajar. She could hear his breathing, wet and rattling, the sound of a sick man's sleep. She pushed the door open slowly. The room smelled of whiskey and unwashed sheets. Rusk lay sprawled across the bed in his nightclothes, one arm flung over his eyes. A pistol rested on the nightstand beside a worn Bible. The pages were dog-eared and stained. Naomi crossed the room and picked up the pistol. It was heavier than she expected, cold and solid in her hand. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She slipped it into the pocket of her dress. That's when she saw the portrait above the bed. Evelyn Rusk stared down from the painting, young and beautiful in a white dress. Someone had pinned a note to the frame. The paper was yellowed and creased, the handwriting shaky. Naomi stepped closer and read the words, "Forgive me." She stared at Evelyn's painted face, the woman who had freed them, the woman who had paid with her life. Rusk stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incomprehensible. Naomi's hand went to the pistol in her pocket. It would be so easy. One shot. End it now. But that wasn't the plan, and Isaac was right. Death was too quick. She backed out of the room and descended the stairs. Outside, the sun had fully risen. Birds sang in the trees as if this were any normal morning, as if the world weren't about to break open. In the tobacco fields, Mary screamed. The sound was cut short by a heavy thud. Then Isaac's voice, low and urgent. "Get the rope." Ruth had gathered her supplies, 3 bottles of lamp oil, a pile of rags torn from old linens, and a box of matches she'd stolen from the kitchen. She met Naomi behind the barn and pressed them into her hands. "The Lord's work ain't always gentle," Ruth said quietly. "But it's still the Lord's work." Naomi wasn't sure she believed that anymore, but she nodded anyway. They waited until full dawn. Then Isaac gave the signal, a low whistle like a mockingbird's call. They moved as one. Isaac and Samuel dragged Clay's unconscious body into the smokehouse and threw him in the cellar. Jonas kicked open Rusk's bedroom door. The master woke with a shout, reaching for his pistol, but it was gone. Jonas hit him across the jaw with a fist that had been waiting 5 years to connect. Rusk crumpled. They dragged him across the yard as he struggled and cursed. His nightshirt tore. His feet left trails in the dirt. When he saw the smokehouse, he began to scream. "No, no, you can't. I'll have you all hanged. Isaac hit him again. Blood sprayed from Rusk's nose. They threw him down the cellar stairs. He landed hard, gasping and crying out in pain. Then they descended after him, carrying chains and iron cuffs and all the instruments of suffering that Rusk had used for so many years. They stripped him to his underclothes, chained his wrists to the center post, chained his ankles to iron rings in the floor. He could sit or kneel, but he couldn't stand, couldn't lie down. The same position Naomi had endured for 5 years. When it was done, they stood in a circle around him. Rusk's face was pale and slick with sweat. Blood ran from his nose and mouth. He looked smaller now, diminished without his authority and fine clothes. Just a man, just flesh and bone and fear. Isaac knelt in front of him. The morning light coming through the open cellar door cast half his face in shadow. "This time," Isaac said slowly, "you call us by name." Rusk spat blood at Isaac's feet. Then he laughed, a wet, broken sound that echoed off the cellar walls. "I named you once," he said. "That's all you get." 2 nights later, the cellar had become a tomb for the living. Naomi sat on the cold floor with her back against the wall, a piece of charcoal in her hand. She'd found it in the remnants of an old fire pit, Rusk's fire pit, where he'd heated branding iron. Now she used it to write on the brick, "The first shall be last." The letters were uneven and crude, but they were hers. Each word felt like reclaiming something stolen. Across the cellar, Rusk slumped against his chains. The iron cuffs had rubbed his wrists raw. Blood crusted around the metal. His face had gone pale and waxy, like candle wax left too long in the sun. 2 days without proper food. 2 days drinking from a wooden bucket. 2 days sitting in his own filth. He'd stopped cursing them yesterday. Now he only whispered. "Please," Rusk breathed. His voice cracked. "Please, I'm begging you." Isaac sat on an overturned crate, sharpening a knife against a whetstone. The sound filled the silence between Rusk's pleas. Scrape, scrape, scrape. You hear something? Isaac asked Jonas, not looking up from his work. Jonas shook his head. Nothing but wind. Please, Rusk said again. Water. Just water. Mary dipped a tin cup into the bucket, the same bucket Rusk had used to feed them for years. She walked over and held it to his lips. Most of it spilled down his chin. He lapped at it desperately, making sounds like an animal. When the cup was empty, Mary pulled it away. Rusk's eyes followed it like a starving dog watching meat. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, Shut your mouth, Mary said. Her voice was flat and empty. Naomi watched from her place against the wall. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the little boy with green eyes, heard him whisper, Mama, in the darkness, wondered if her own child was out there somewhere, sold to another plantation, calling someone else by that name. The charcoal crumbled in her hand. She picked up another piece and kept writing. The last shall be first. How long we keeping him like this? Samuel asked. He stood near the cellar stairs, keeping watch through the crack in the door. Someone might come looking. Traitors. Law. Let them come, Isaac said. Scrape, scrape. We'll chain them too. That ain't the plan, Naomi said quietly. Isaac's hand stopped moving. He looked at her across the dim cellar. The lantern hanging from a ceiling beam cast shadows that made his face look like a stranger's. The plan's changed, he said. Has it? He needs to suffer longer. He's suffering now, Naomi said. Look at him. They both looked at Rusk. He'd started rocking back and forth, chains clinking softly. His lips moved without sound. Prayers, maybe. Or madness. Not enough, Isaac said. He went back to sharpening the knife. The hours crawled past like wounded things. Rusk began to hallucinate as the second night deepened. He stared at the empty air and spoke to ghosts. Evelyn, he whispered. Evelyn, is that you? No one answered. I'm sorry, Rusk said to the darkness. I didn't mean, please, you have to understand. It was business, just business. The children they were product, that's all. I never meant to hurt you. His voice rose, cracking into a sob. Don't look at me like that. Stop looking at me. Naomi's hands shook as she wrote another verse on the wall. The words blurred together. She had to blink hard to see them clearly. We should end this, she said. Isaac set down the whetstone. The knife gleamed in his hand, sharp enough to split shadow. You're right. We should. He stood and crossed the cellar toward Rusk. Each footstep echoed. Rusk's head snapped up, his eyes wild and unfocused. No, Naomi said. She stood too. That's not what I meant. Isaac stopped. Then what did you mean? We should let him go. The words fell into the silence like stones into a well. Everyone stared at her. You've lost your mind, Jonas said. Maybe I have, Naomi said. But I know what killing him will do to us, to our souls. We'll carry it forever. Good, Isaac said. I want to carry it. I want to remember every second of watching him die. That's not justice, Naomi said. Her voice trembled, but didn't break. That's just more chains. Different metal, same weight. Isaac's jaw tightened. Justice? You want to talk about justice? Where was justice when he took us? When he bred us like animals? When he sold our children? Justice doesn't come from his death, Naomi said. It comes from our freedom. There's no freedom while he's breathing. There's no freedom if we become him. Isaac moved closer to her. The knife hung at his side. For a moment, Naomi thought he might raise it against her instead. But he just stood there, trembling with rage. You didn't see what I saw, Isaac said quietly. Before the cellar. I was in the forge. He brought his son there. Boy couldn't have been more than 10. Wanted me to brand him, his own son. Said the boy needed to learn that even family gets marked if they're half black. I refused, so he beat me and did it himself. That child screams. I hear them every night. Tears ran down Isaac's face. He didn't wipe them away. I can't let that go, he said. I can't show mercy to a monster. Then you dishonor everyone who died, Naomi said. Because if we kill him like this, we're no different than him. We're just wearing different skin. You think the dead care about mercy? Isaac's voice rose. You think they're watching us from heaven, hoping we do the right thing? They want blood. They want justice. They want him to pay. No, Naomi said. They want us to be free. Isaac raised the knife. His whole body shook with it. Rage and grief, and 5 years of suffocating darkness, all pouring into that single moment. Rusk watched him approach. The master's face had gone slack, beyond fear now. He just stared with empty eyes. Do it, Rusk whispered. Please, just do it. Isaac's hand tightened on the knife handle. He knelt in front of Rusk, put the blade against the master's throat. The sharp edge drew a thin line of blood. Isaac, Naomi said. Please. Isaac's hand trembled. The knife shook. He closed his eyes. That's when Rusk laughed. It was a wet, broken sound. Blood bubbled on his lips. He looked at Isaac, then at Naomi, and laughed again. Look at you, Rusk said. His voice was thick and strange. Tearing yourselves apart. Can't even agree on how to kill me. You're still slaves. You'll always be slaves. Even when I'm dead, you'll wear the chains I gave you. He reached into his coat with his free hand, the one that could barely move, cuffed and chained but still possessing inches of movement. His fingers fumbled at the inner pocket. What? Isaac started. Rusk pulled out a small glass flask. It was stoppered with cork, filled with amber liquid. Before anyone could react, he yanked the cork with his teeth and tipped the contents into his mouth. No! Naomi lunged forward. Too late. Rusk swallowed. The flask fell from his hand and shattered on the floor. He gasped once, twice. His body convulsed against the chains. What did you do? Isaac grabbed his shoulders. What did you do? Rusk smiled. Blood leaked from the corners of his mouth. One, he whispered. Then his eyes went glassy. His head fell forward. The chains held him upright like a puppet with cut strings, but the man was gone. The cellar went silent except for the sound of breathing. Naomi's, Isaac's, the others watching from the shadows. Isaac dropped the knife. It clattered on the floor next to the broken flask. He stood there, staring at Rusk's corpse, his hands empty. The lantern hanging from the ceiling flickered. Once, twice. Then the flame died, plunging them into darkness. Naomi's voice came from somewhere in the black. We didn't kill him, she whispered, but we buried ourselves with him. Morning came without mercy. The first light crept through the cracks in the cellar door like something afraid to enter. It touched Rusk's face first, the gray skin, the dried blood crusted at his lips, the empty eyes staring at nothing. The corpse hung from the chains, swaying slightly as if breathing, but it was just the wind moving through the walls. Naomi stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking at him. She'd been standing there for an hour, maybe more, watching, waiting for something to change, for revelation or peace or rage, but nothing came. Just emptiness. We need to move, Isaac said. He'd climbed the stairs to check the grounds above. Sun's up. Someone might come. Naomi nodded, but didn't move. Isaac descended the stairs slowly. He stopped beside her. They both looked at Rusk's body together. This thing that had owned them, controlled them, marked them as property. In death, he seemed smaller, shriveled, just meat and bone like anyone else. You were right, Isaac said quietly. About what? If I'd killed him, I'd carry it. Forever. Would have made me into something I couldn't live with. Naomi reached out and took his hand. His palm was rough, scarred from the forge and the chains. She held it tight. We carry it anyway, she said. Just different weight. She stepped forward and unlocked the shackles from the wall. The iron cuffs fell away from Rusk's wrists with a dull clang. His body slumped to the floor. She didn't look at it again. One by one, Naomi moved through the cellar, unlocking every chain from every post. The iron that had held her, the iron that had held Isaac, the iron that had held 8 souls in darkness for years, breeding and suffering and dying in this buried pit. When she pulled the last chain free, she gathered them all in her arms. The weight of them made her stagger. Mary helped her carry them up the stairs into the daylight. The morning air was cold and clean. Naomi breathed it in deep, tasting freedom and smoke, and the faint rot of the swamp. The plantation grounds spread out before them. Empty fields, sagging barn, the main house with its white columns and black shutters. "We burn it all," Isaac said. Jonas and Samuel had already started inside the mansion. They dragged leather-bound ledgers from Rusk's study, stacking them in the courtyard. Mary found the breeding records in a locked drawer. Pages and pages of names, dates, pairings, which woman with which man, which child sold where. The entire system documented in Rusk's careful handwriting. Naomi opened one of the ledgers. Her own name stared back at her. Naomi, age 18. Acquired May 1849. Strong hips, good teeth. Paired with Isaac, blacksmith stock, June 1850. Below that, in smaller writing, child born April 1851. Male. Light skin. Sold to Thornhill Plantation, $400. Her hands shook so badly the pages blurred. She slammed the ledger shut and threw it onto the pile. "Burn it," she said. "Burn all of it." They worked for hours, emptying the house. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence that Rusk's breeding project had ever existed. They found letters from other plantation owners inquiring about purchasing mixed stock. They found bills of sale for children as young as 2 years old. They found a journal where Rusk detailed his theories about genetics and bloodlines, writing about human beings like a farmer writes about cattle. The pile in the courtyard grew taller. Papers and books and contracts and deeds, the entire infrastructure of evil rendered into kindling. Old Ruth emerged from the kitchen with lamp oil. She poured it over the pile, soaking the pages until they glistened. The smell of kerosene filled the air. Isaac struck a match. The flame caught instantly. It spread through the pile like something alive, hungry, eager to consume. Black smoke rose in thick columns. Pages curled and blackened. Names disappeared into ash. The documentation of suffering, all the careful records of who was chained to whom, who bore whose child, who was sold for how much. All of it vanished into fire. They watched it burn. The heat drove them back, but they couldn't look away. When the pile had burned down to embers, Isaac picked up one of the oil lamps and threw it through the mansion's front window. Glass shattered. Flames erupted inside the parlor where Evelyn Rusk had hung herself. The fire spread quickly, feeding on curtains and furniture and the dry wood of the walls. Jonas set the barn ablaze. Samuel lit the smokehouse. Mary poured oil around the base of the main house and ignited it. The flames climbed the white columns, turning them black. They ate through the roof, sending sparks spiraling into the morning sky. The smoke could be seen for miles, thick and dark, and carrying the ash of Red Hollow's sins into the wind. Naomi walked to the cellar entrance one last time. The wooden door stood open, revealing the stairs descending into darkness. Rusk's body still lay at the bottom, small and forgotten. She poured the last of the lamp oil down the stairs and dropped a match. The flames followed the oil like water, rushing down into the cellar. Within minutes, the underground chamber was an inferno. The walls that had sweated with suffering now wept with fire. Naomi stepped back as the cellar door began to burn. She knelt in the dirt and picked up one of the iron shackles she'd removed from the walls. It was cold and heavy in her hands. Rust stained her palms. "He built his name on chains," she said. The others gathered around her, watching the plantation burn. "We'll end it with fire." The roof of the main house collapsed with a roar. Sparks fountained into the air. The heat was tremendous now, making the air shimmer. Orange light danced across their faces as they stood in a line, watching Red Hollow die. One by one, they turned away. Mary first, then Jonas, and Samuel, and Ruth. Isaac waited for Naomi. She stood, still holding the shackle. She looked at it for a long moment, this piece of iron that had held her in darkness. Then she dropped it into the flames consuming the cellar entrance. It disappeared into the fire without a sound. They walked away together. Behind them, the firelight glowed against the morning sky. The flames climbed higher, brighter, consuming everything Alden Rusk had built. The barn collapsed. The smokehouse caved in. The mansion's walls crumbled into burning rubble. Naomi didn't look back. None of them did. They walked toward the tree line, toward the swamp, toward whatever came next. The heat followed them for a long time, warming their backs even as they moved into shadow. When they reached the edge of the property, Naomi stopped. She turned just once and looked at the burning remains of Red Hollow. The smoke rose in a single black column, marking the place where chains had been forged and suffering had been hidden, and now, finally, where it all had ended. She whispered 2 words, not loud, just breath and sound and truth. "It's done." The swamp taught patience. 5 days had passed since Red Hollow burned. 5 days of moving deeper into the wetlands, following old deer paths and hidden channels that only Isaac remembered from his youth. The water was dark as tea, stained brown by cypress roots. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds, but here, in this forgotten place where the trees grew so thick the sun barely touched the ground, they were safe. They built camp on a patch of high ground, surrounded by water on 3 sides. Simple shelters made from branches and Spanish moss. A fire pit ringed with stones. Lines strung between trees for drying clothes and fish. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The children adapted quickly. 7 of them, ranging from 3 to 10 years old, all bearing Rusk's features in different measures. They'd been silent at first, traumatized and hollow-eyed. But children heal faster than adults. Within days they were playing at the water's edge, catching tadpoles and building small dams from mud and sticks. Naomi watched them from the fire. A little girl with tight curls splashed her brother, laughing. 2 boys raced along a fallen log, arms spread for balance. The sound of their joy felt impossible, miraculous, like something stolen back from death. "They don't remember much," Mary said, sitting beside Naomi. She was weaving a basket from reeds, her hands moving with practiced rhythm. "The little ones, anyway. Maybe that's mercy. Or maybe they'll remember everything," Naomi said. "Just won't have words for it yet." Mary nodded. Her own daughter had been sold south 3 years ago. She never spoke about it, but sometimes Naomi caught her staring at the girls in camp with an expression that held both love and unbearable loss. The air smelled of ash and new rain. A storm had come through the previous night, washing some of the smoke smell from their clothes and hair. But it still lingered, in the fabric, in their skin, a reminder of what they'd done. Isaac emerged from the tree line carrying an armload of salvaged metal. He'd been making trips back toward the burned plantation, retrieving what could be used. Melted chains, bent nails, broken tools, anything iron. He'd set up a small forge near the camp's edge, just a pit lined with stones and a makeshift bellows made from deer skin. Not much compared to the smithy he'd once worked in, but enough. Naomi rose and walked over to him. He was arranging the metal pieces, sorting them by size and type. His hands were already stained black from the work. "What are you making?" she asked. "Blades for farming," he said. "Hoe heads, sickles, tools for growing things instead of breaking them." He held up a section of chain, studying it in the light. The links were thick and heavy, designed to hold human beings. He placed it in the forge and pumped the bellows until the coals glowed orange. "Turning chains into plowshares," Naomi said. Something like that. They worked in comfortable silence, Isaac heating and hammering, Naomi helping to hold pieces steady or pump the bellows when his arms tired. The ring of metal on metal echoed through the swamp. The children came to watch, fascinated by the sparks and heat. As evening approached, Jonas returned to camp with news. He'd been scouting the edges of the swamp, watching the roads and listening to travelers. He moved quickly through the camp and gathered everyone near the fire. "Word spreading," he said. "About Red Hollow." "What kind of word?" Isaac asked. "All kinds. Some say it was lightning struck the house. Others claim Rusk went mad and burned it himself. But there's talk, too, about the people who were kept there, about how they vanished the same night the fire started." Old Ruth snorted. "They know we escaped." "More than that." Jonas leaned forward, his voice dropping. "They're calling us ghosts, spirits that rose up from the cellar and took revenge. I heard 2 overseers talking at a crossroads. They said Red Hollow's cursed now. Said anyone who goes there hears chains rattling in the ruins." Samuel laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Ghosts. That's what we are to them. Not people. Never people. Let them think we're ghosts," Mary said. "Keeps them afraid." "It's doing more than that," Jonas continued. 3 overseers quit from plantations near Red Hollow, packed up, and left. One of them said he wasn't dying for another man's sins. The slaves there are whispering that if it happened at Red Hollow, it could happen anywhere. Naomi felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope, not quite pride. Something heavier, the weight of what they'd started. "We freed 7 children," she said quietly. "And maybe we freed hundreds more just by showing it could be done. Or we made it worse," Isaac said. "Masters might tighten their grip. Make examples." "They were already making examples," Naomi shot back. "They were already tightening grips. Nothing we did made that worse because it couldn't get worse than what already was." The fire crackled between them. The children had grown quiet, sensing the tension in the adults' voices. One of the little boys came and pressed against Naomi's side. She wrapped her arm around him automatically. That night, Naomi dreamed. She stood in the swamp at dawn. The water was still and silver. Mist rose from the surface in lazy spirals. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. The sound was clear and bright, cutting through the fog like a bell. She turned toward it. Through the cypress trees, she saw a boy, 4 or 5 years old. Light brown skin, her nose, her eyes. He crouched at the water's edge, poking at something with a stick. "Baby?" she called. The boy looked up, smiled, went back to his playing. Naomi tried to move toward him, but her feet wouldn't obey. The water between them grew wider. The mist thickened. She reached out, but he was already fading, becoming part of the reeds, part of the swamp, part of everything she'd lost and would never get back. When she woke, her face was wet. The fire had burned down to coals. Stars showed through gaps in the moss overhead. Somewhere, a night bird called. She rose quietly and walked to the water's edge. The swamp at night was alive with sound. Frogs singing, insects buzzing, the splash of fish jumping. Life continuing despite everything. Because of everything. Isaac found her there an hour later. He didn't speak. Just stood beside her, looking out at the dark water. "I dreamed about my son," she said finally. "You'll dream about him a lot. For a long time. Does it get easier?" "No. You just get stronger at carrying it." They stood together as the eastern sky began to lighten. Gray becoming pink, becoming gold. The frogs' chorus grew louder, welcoming the dawn. When the sun broke over the horizon, Naomi turned back toward camp. The children were stirring. Mary was building up the fire. Jonas and Samuel were checking the fish traps. The simple work of survival beginning again. Naomi looked toward the horizon one last time. Somewhere out there, masters were afraid. Somewhere out there, enslaved people were whispering about Red Hollow and wondering if freedom was possible. She thought about Evelyn Rusk's last words. You owe him pain. But pain wasn't enough. Revenge wasn't enough. The fire had consumed Red Hollow, but it hadn't ended the system that built it. The real work, the hard work, was just beginning. Let them fear ghosts, Naomi said quietly. Isaac looked at her, waiting. She met his eyes and nodded toward the camp, toward the children, toward the tools he was forging from chains. We got work to do. The sound of frogs rose around them, ancient and endless, singing the swamp into morning. Weeks passed like water through open fingers. The camp became something more permanent, not quite a settlement, but no longer temporary. They built lean-tos from cypress branches and palmetto fronds, dug a proper fire pit lined with river stones, cleared a small patch of ground where the soil looked rich enough for planting. The children helped with everything. Their laughter had returned fully now, bright and unguarded. They chased each other through the trees, built elaborate cities from mud and sticks, invented games with rules only they understood. Sometimes Naomi watched them and felt her chest grow tight with gratitude and grief all tangled together. Mary and old Ruth tended the crops. They'd salvaged seeds from abandoned gardens near Red Hollow. Corn, beans, sweet potatoes. The wet soil of the swamp wasn't ideal farming land, but Ruth knew tricks for building raised beds that drained properly. Within weeks, green shoots pushed through the dark earth. Small miracles of persistence. Jonas and Samuel built fish traps from woven reeds and set them in the shallow water. They came back each morning with catfish and bream, enough to feed everyone, enough to smoke and store for harder days. Isaac worked the forge daily. The ring of his hammer became as familiar as birdsong. He'd made 3 hoes, 2 sickles, and a dozen smaller tools. Each piece of metal transformed from instrument of bondage into something useful, something that helped things grow instead of keeping them down. But Naomi held onto one piece, a single iron shackle. She'd kept it hidden in her pack, wrapped in cloth so the others wouldn't see. She didn't know why at first. Maybe as evidence, maybe as reminder, maybe because some wounds needed visible scars. On a morning when the air smelled clean and new, she walked to the river alone. The water moved slowly here, wide and brown and patient. Cypress trees lined both banks, their knees rising from the shallows like silent witnesses. She sat on a fallen log and unwrapped the shackle. The iron was cold despite the warmth of the day. Rust had started forming in the joints and edges, time already beginning its work of erosion, of forgetting. But Naomi wouldn't forget, couldn't forget. She turned the shackle over in her hands, studying the mechanism, the simple cruelty of its design. Made to lock around a human ankle or wrist and stay locked. Made to remove choice, movement, freedom. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Isaac emerged from the tree line carrying a shovel he'd fashioned from salvaged metal and a strong oak branch. He'd known somehow. Or maybe he'd been watching, understanding what she needed to do. Found a good spot, he said, nodding toward a small rise of ground 20 yards from the river. A young magnolia tree grew there, barely 8 feet tall. Its leaves were deep green and waxy. A few white blossoms showed among the branches, their perfume sweet and clean. Naomi rose and followed him to the tree. The ground beneath it was soft, covered in a layer of fallen leaves and moss. Isaac handed her the shovel. She dug slowly, methodically. The earth gave way easily, rich and dark and full of roots. When the hole was deep enough, she knelt beside it and held the shackle one last time. "I need to say their names," she whispered. Isaac nodded. "I'll help remember." Naomi closed her eyes. The names came back like prayers, like roll call in the dark. "Esther," she began. Who sang when we couldn't find words? Thomas, Isaac added. Who kept count of the days on the wall? Little Sarah, who was only 12. Naomi's voice cracked, but she continued. Caleb, who tried to dig through the foundation with his bare hands. Rebecca, who prayed until her voice gave out. James, who told stories about his mother's cooking. Lydia, who braided our hair when we couldn't lift our own arms. Marcus, who died the day before Evelyn came. Each name hung in the air like smoke, like incense, like offerings to a God who'd turned away, but maybe, was listening again. Naomi placed the shackle in the hole. The iron settled against the dark earth with a soft thud. She picked up a handful of soil and let it fall through her fingers onto the metal. Then another handful, and another. Isaac knelt beside her and helped. Together they filled the hole, covering the shackle, burying it deep where roots would grow through it, where time and earth would slowly consume it, transform it, make it part of something living instead of something that prevented life. When the hole was filled, Naomi patted the soil down with her palms. Her hands came away black. She didn't wipe them clean, just stood and looked at the magnolia tree. We ain't what he made us, she said quietly. We made ourselves. Isaac's hands were blackened too, from the forge, from the grave, from the work of turning one thing into another. He looked at his palms, then at her. We did, he agreed, and we're still making ourselves, every day. They stood together beneath the magnolia. Its white blossoms moved gently in the breeze. Petals fell like snow, landing on their shoulders and in their hair. The tree didn't know what lay buried beneath its roots, didn't know the weight of history pressed into the earth. It just grew, just bloomed, just reached toward sunlight, because that's what living things do. From the camp, Naomi heard the children's voices. Someone was singing. A simple melody, probably one of Ruth's old spirituals. The words were too distant to make out, but the tune carried across the water. She and Isaac walked back along the river's edge. The water moved beside them, constant and patient. When Naomi looked down, she could see the sky reflected in its surface, clouds drifting, birds passing, the whole dome of heaven captured in brown water. The world felt cleaner somehow. Not pure, too much blood for that. Not innocent, too much memory. But cleaner. Like rain had washed through everything and left the air easier to breathe. Still heavy, though. Still carrying the weight of what had been and what could never be undone. But maybe that weight was necessary. Maybe forgetting would be worse than remembering. Maybe the work was learning to carry both, the weight and the breath, the memory and the magnolia, the chains and the growing things. They reached camp as the sun climbed higher. Mary looked up from the garden and waved. One of the children ran toward them, holding a frog cupped in his small hands. Life continuing, moving forward, refusing to stop despite everything designed to make it stop. Behind them, the magnolia tree stood quiet by the river, its roots growing deeper, its branches reaching higher, a symbol of rebirth and remembrance both, proof that even in poisoned soil, beautiful things could grow. The cellar was gone, but its story lived, whispered by the wind and carried by the free. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.